big boom, or time will tell, or there are some questions about kind of the outlook here?
Yeah, there are a lot of big questions because actually this year was primed to be a pretty big year for gaming even before the pandemic, before we even knew what coronavirus was, because there are two new consoles coming out this fall, the new PlayStation and the new Xbox. And we are entering what the gaming world refers to as a new console generation, which is the type of thing that happens once every 7 or 8 years or so. So this is a pretty monumental event for the gaming world, and we kind of are seeing the future of gaming come out this fall. So now there are all sorts of questions about the new Xbox and PlayStation and how well they'll sell. We happen to also be in an economic recession, and a lot of people are out of work and don't have the disposable income that they did. Right. So a lot of big questions remaining, like how many people are going to be able to buy a new $500 console this fall? That is one of the big questions that we won't know until November, December or so.
And who has the edge with the new consoles, or do we know yet? Does it remain to be seen?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting. I think both of these, we have Sony on one side of things and Microsoft on one side of things, but they've kind of both adopted completely different strategies, so they're not even really competing against one another anymore. In some ways they are, and they're doing the whole marketing warfare, like who has the most powerful console, and you see a lot of tweets, a lot of snarky tweets from their marketing people. But really, Sony is still playing the same game that they always have. They're going after exclusive games. They're putting all this money, millions and millions of dollars into games that you can only play on the PlayStation 5. Microsoft is taking a completely new approach, and they have put a lot of money, and my colleague Dina Bass wrote a great story about this for the magazine. They put a lot of money into what's called Xbox Game Pass, which is essentially Netflix for video games. You pay $10 a month, and you can get access to a whole bunch of games. And they seem to care a lot more about that than they do about selling the new console, because they're trying to put their games on as many platforms as possible. They don't have the same sort of exclusive strategy that Sony does. So if I had to predict, if I had to put on my prognostication hat, I would say that PlayStation sells more, but Xbox might be better positioned for the future as people kind of get more accustomed to platforms rather than dedicated consoles.
All right, Jason Schreier, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much, tech reporter for Bloomberg, joining us on the phone from New York. Our thanks as well to Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He joined us from Massachusetts. Check out that cover package. It is really terrific. As Jason Schreier said, a whole bunch of people coming together around this. They are featured in the new issue of the magazine. That is available at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Terminal as well, Carol.
Yeah, man, that story just about blockbuster video games minting millions while the grunts get exploited.
Yeah.
This is going to play into, I feel like, to some extent, the interview we're going to do with Peter Atwater about, some people are benefiting, some people are not, kind of in our world right now for many, many different reasons.
Well, and I have to say, I do think back to all those great conversations we had over the years with our buddy Matthew Canterman, who's now based over in Asia, about the video game business, especially the creators of games and how it's so hit-driven. And Jason did a nice job explaining that. All right, for those of you listening in New York, D.C., San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week continues right here. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business, that is coming up next. Coming up next here, the K-quote of the day. We're going right to the source of it. We know he listens to the show. We're excited to have him.
Totally.
This is, I have to say, this makes sense to me when you describe this recovery in the shape of a K.
Right. Not the Nike swoop, not, pick whatever other letter, but the K-shaped recovery. That makes sense to me. This is Bloomberg.
3 p.m. on Wall Street, so we have an hour remaining in today's trading session. Much of the equity market is extending records from yesterday. That's the case for the S&P 500, higher now by about 0.4%. The day began with a speech, much-awaited speech from Fed Chair Jay Powell, who was unveiling a new approach to set U.S. monetary policy. Basically, the idea is to allow both inflation and the labor market to run hot. And this idea of a rising rate of inflation in the future is sending bond yields higher, with a 10-year Treasury now up more than 5 basis points. We're at 74 basis points, and that is allowing the banks to rally today. The S&P 500 financials up about 1.9%. Financial shares leading the Dow higher by more than 0.9%. The S&P better by 0.5%. The NASDAQ comp has been struggling. We've been kind of fluctuating here between gains and losses. The gain right now is about less than 0.1%. At the margins, we heard from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi earlier saying she's not going to budge from Democrats' demands for a new pandemic relief package. In terms of eco data, weekly jobless claims remain above 1 million. Pending home sales, however, reaching the highest level in nearly 15 years in the month of July. Abbott Laboratories rallying by more than 8% right now. Company has won clearance for a 15-minute COVID test. Oracle and Microsoft have each submitted bids to buy the U.S. operations of TikTok. We're told a deal could come this week, and now Microsoft, we are coming to understand that the company's bid will include a partnership with Walmart. Walmart saying today it could reach customers and grow its third-party marketplace and advertising business. Walmart shares right now rallying by 4.5%. Microsoft up 3%. To be fair, Oracle is down about 0.3%. Beyond Meat will sell its plant-based burgers and sausages directly to consumers through a new e-commerce platform. Beyond Meat right now better by more than 6%. I'm Doug Krisner. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash. We'll have another update in 15 minutes.
All right, thanks, Doug. We really appreciate it. Well, obviously, Hurricane Laura, it has wreaked havoc across the Texas and Louisiana part of this country, the coast. Let's check in with Joe Carroll. He is our Houston bureau chief, joining us on the phone. No stranger to these storms, unfortunately. Joe, how are you? You doing okay? Tell us what's going on.
Oh, we're great. We were very, very lucky in Houston. The storm, it was just a glancing blow, really, at the eastern suburbs. This really pounded far east Texas and southern Louisiana really got the worst of it.
Yeah, I'm seeing a number of more than $15 billion in insured losses, flooded roads, wrecked buildings, chemical fires. You know, it certainly was downgraded, which thank God, but it's still, we're talking about a lot of damage here, Joe.
Yeah, there's a very bad chemical fire going on near the town of Lake Charles. It's been burning for hours and hours. It's huge. A lot of devastation. There's that part of Louisiana, there's a big casino industry, and we've just seen widespread destruction of those resorts.
How long will it take, Joe, until we really understand all of the damage here? I mean, this is a storm that obviously has lost some of its steam coming ashore, but when will we have a really good estimate as people sort of clear debris and understand what's underneath it all?
You know, what this region is really based on is oil and gas and everything you make from those. So oil, gas, refining chemicals. And the concern was that the storm would really hit the southeast Texas complex. It grazed them, as I said, and so much of this was confined to sugarcane fields in Louisiana. There are chemical plants that were mauled, but it certainly would have been many magnitudes of order worse if it had come a little bit west.
All right. Well, we really appreciate the time and the update and the hard work that your team is doing. We will have another update for you on what's happening with the hurricane at the top of the next hour. Our thanks to Joe Carroll, Houston Bureau Chief for Bloomberg. Carroll.
So, Jason, our most read story on the Bloomberg, it's about Fed Chair Jay Powell unveiling a new approach to setting U.S. monetary policy, letting inflation and employment run higher in a shift that will likely keep interest rates low for years to come. We talked about this with Mike McKee at the top of our broadcast. It's really all part of our economic reality and one where many have searched to describe this particular recovery. In today's Business Week Economics, we've got one perspective on this, and it is gaining momentum. It's called the K-shaped recovery, first written about, I think, in June by Peter Atwater. He's adjunct professor and lecturer of economics at William & Mary. He joins us on the phone from Pennsylvania. I am so delighted, we both are, that you are here. We've been doing a little bit of a Twitter conversation, but tell us about your observations of the economy, Peter, and how you came to this, because it really does tell the story of what's been going on because of the virus, because of the so many inequalities that has kind of laid bare again.
Sure. Thank you, Carol. So I watched the world through the lens of confidence, and beginning in March, I noticed something really interesting. We all panicked together. You could see the collapse in confidence being spread across the entire economy. Everybody felt it the same way. But the migration of people, professionals, to the work from home environment put them very quickly on stable ground, and you could see their confidence start to rebound, where out into the real economy, small businesses, people working in the travel industry, it was very clear that they were not on solid ground. In fact, for many of them, you could start to see conditions getting worse. And at some point in April, I started writing about it, and on Twitter, somebody was talking about all the different letters and mentioned the letter K, and I thought, this is perfect. This is exactly what we're seeing, is that for some in the economy, things are improving, and for others, the deterioration has just been this very painful decline.
And so, Peter, how much of this is new and how much of it is exacerbating things that were already there?
So I think if you were to step back and look at the recovery from the banking crisis, that itself was very much a K-shaped recovery. The financial markets took off very quickly as the Fed went into overdrive. But, one of the things that came out earlier today in the statements from Chairman Powell and others is that it took until very late in the cycle for the benefits of all of that trickle down to reach low-income Americans. And so I think we've had this prolonged 10-year K-shaped recovery that has now been compounded by a very sharp rebound for some, and it's just others are left hanging.
So is this our world, our new world economic reality, Peter, in that we're just going to have K recoveries? Or can we, as you said, the benefits trickle down very late, coming off the financial crisis. How do we get it so that the benefits get to everybody sooner on?
So I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that from an economic perspective, we have to ensure that there is support for those at the low end, because we know that this condition lasts, that it takes a long period of time. And in that process, I think Congress made a valiant effort, but the attention to the relief efforts for the pandemic, they were really oriented around a mindset that this was temporary. And so, unfortunately, those that were, the beneficiaries of that, they started as early as late May beginning to wonder, is this coming to an end? And from a confidence perspective, we need certainty. They need to know that these support mechanisms are going to be in place until employment comes back.
All right, we're going to continue this conversation. We have a lot more questions for Peter Atwater. Loving this conversation. Professor of Economics down at William & Mary, joining us on the phone from Pennsylvania. And we think a lot about this, Carol.
Totally.
And I go back to the conversation even that we had yesterday with Rob Frohwein from Cabbage about small businesses.
Right.
Not everyone is created equal in all of this, economically, socially, in so many ways.
Well, and what Peter had to say about confidence perspective, that is so important in terms of people feeling confident enough to continue to be participants in the economy. If they don't feel confident, that's when you see the economy get into a tougher way and maybe stay lower for longer. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we'll come back with Peter Atwater over at William & Mary in just a moment. In the meantime, back to World and National News headlines. A lot going on. Let's check in once again with Nancy Lyons.
Thanks, Carol. Hurricane Laura has weakened after making landfall overnight as a Category 4 hurricane. It is still, though, pummeling southwest Louisiana and Arkansas with tropical storm strength winds. Residents are assessing the heavy damage caused by the storm. Beecher Throat rode it out, huddled in the bathroom of her home in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
The house was shaking. It felt like the ground was shaking, and there were just things hitting the house constantly. So it was pretty scary.
FEMA Administrator Peter Gaynor says the damage seems to be less than what they feared. President Trump will be accepting his party's nomination for a second term as President of the United States. We get a preview of tonight's speech from Bloomberg's Amy Morris.
President Trump will accept the nomination from the South Lawn of the White House. His speech will be in part a response to Democratic nominee Joe Biden's speech, which accused the president of failing to handle the coronavirus pandemic. The president will position himself as being the only person who can fix the nation's problems, arguing that his administration should be applauded for its response to the virus. The president is also likely to continue his message of law and order nationalism while outlining his agenda for a second term. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg will be providing live coverage of the convention tonight, starting at 9 Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she does not think there should be presidential debates this year, arguing that Democrat Joe Biden should not legitimize a conversation with President Trump. Pelosi says she believes Trump will probably act in a way beneath the dignity of the presidency. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. You were listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Masser, and we're going to get back in just a minute to our conversation with Peter Atwater. But appropriate to that is some continuing reporting about what's going on with the MTA here in New York. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, following on a conversation we had yesterday, Carol, is about the ridership. And I'm not sure if you saw these numbers or we talked about them in depth yesterday. So subway ridership is down 75% right now. And Metro North Railroad, which I find even more interesting, in part because I ride it, it's off by 83%.
I know, it's
and
staggering
even
numbers.
that delta, that 8% delta, I do think speaks to the idea that the suburbs, folks in the suburbs, I among them, just not going into the city.
Right.
And part of that is because,
We
for the
can.
most part, we don't have to.
Right. Speaks very much to what Peter's just talking about, Peter Atwater. I mean, this whole idea. And then there are workers who don't have a choice. They've got to be wherever their, place of work is located. They've got to be there. And they often are using mass transportation. So I do wonder how folks are getting around right now. And, this doomsday scenario that's being laid out that might be the future of the MTA, we're talking about, we talked about it earlier in the week, longer wait times for subways, buses, and commuter trains. I mean, the federal government, MTA is hoping that they're going to come through with about $12 billion of additional aid to cover the current budget shortfalls because nobody's riding it. There's no revenue coming in. I mean, basically all the revenue is gone, and yet they still have to operate the service.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. This is kind of a do or die situation.
Yeah, it's bleak to say the least.
Yeah.
And, what's interesting is Tom DiNapoli, who is the state's comptroller, talked about how everything that they've been trying to do to, cut costs may not be enough. He said borrowing for operations will be necessary and push debt service costs, look at this, to more than a quarter of every dollar of revenue. God. So more than 25 cents for every dollar that comes in just to pay off debt.
The MTA has $45.4 billion worth of debt as of early July. Yeah, that's unbelievable. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
So we are less than 43 minutes until the closing bell, and the equity market right now is higher. In a couple of cases, we are extending yesterday's record. Day began with the speech from Fed Chair Jay Powell. That's having quite an effect. Let's get to the Bloomberg Macro Squawk Desk. Bring in Bailey Schultz for a look at today's price action. Bailey.
Good afternoon, Doug. As you said, stocks are mostly higher after Fed Chair Powell unveiled a new monetary policy approach. The Dow is up 275 points, S&P is up 15, but the Nasdaq is little changed. U.S. 10-year yield is at 0.74%, and small caps are up 6 points. 9 of the 11 main S&P sectors are trading higher, led by gains in financials, real estate, and healthcare, while communications and consumer discretionary are in the red. Nasdaq Biotechs rose 10 points, transports climbed 1%, semis are lower by 20 points, while the VIX is higher by 5%. Leaders in the Dow, Walmart, Travelers, and American Express, while Home Depot, Exxon, and Apple are the worst performers. Walmart spiked the most since July after teaming up with Microsoft for a TikTok bid. Abbott surged after its rapid COVID-19 test was cleared by regulators. Beyond Meat gained after launching a direct-to-consumer website. And WW moved higher after partnering with Amazon for its new fitness program. Wrapping things up, look for earnings from VMware and Dell after the bell. Live from the First Word Breaking News Desk, I'm Bailey Lipschultz. Doug?
All right, Bailey, thank you. To get the live breaking news in audio form right on the Bloomberg terminal, the function is SQUA, then it's the green go key. I'm Doug Krisner. That is the Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Doug, thanks so much. Let's get right back to our conversation with Peter Atwater, professor of economics at William and Mary, joins us on the phone from Pennsylvania. So, Peter, as we think about a K-shaped recovery going forward, what's the difference, the inflection point, or the chances, I'm giving you so many scenarios here, that it becomes just a K-shaped economy?
I think we're reaching a point where it has become so obvious that almost prevents it from happening. If I look around in the financial markets, you see an extraordinary divide between big business and small business. You see it in individuals. You see it in so many levels that you have stacked inequity on one end and stacked privilege on the other. And my sense is that much of this is we're already seeing manifest in the social unrest around the country. There's clear resonance to that sense of inequity. And, even people who can't articulate it feel that there is something unjust about the system as it exists today. And so I think this is even much more of a social K issue as it is an economic one. And I think, policymakers and leaders of business need to recognize that that lack of confidence, that sense of hopelessness that many on the leg of the K are feeling is now motivating people to respond.
So, Peter, it's interesting that you say that. I have conversations with my young nieces who are in their 20s, like, God, capitalism is terrible. I'm like, no, it builds things. It also provides, this is, where people can have opportunities to build a company from nothing and then give back, So there are a lot of pluses to it. But yes, it has created some massive inequalities in our systems. I am curious about some of the conversations you're having at William and Mary, and what are the policies from your perspective as you study this that you think will make a difference, will reduce those gaps that currently exist in our society and have for a while and have just been building and getting wider and wider?
I think one of the things that has to be looked at is, at the root of this, in many ways, goes back to the early 1980s with that notion of shareholder primacy, that the shareholder came first. And as much as we want to enjoy the benefits of capitalism, I think that pendulum has shifted to such an extreme. And you saw it in news reports yesterday. Salesforce announces, record earnings, stock price soars, and at the same time, 10,000 employees to be laid off. That's a very mixed message from capitalism.
Right. Well, so what is it? Business Roundtable has come out and said, okay, there's multiple parties that matter, constituents that we have to think about, but I don't know. It's a lot of talk, and I want to see whether or not things change. What do we need to do?
Well, and I think you're seeing change start to happen. I mean, if you were to just look at the NBA last night, being forced to respond to the social issues as they're manifesting around us.
Yeah, I wonder, and I'm glad you said that. I wondered what you made of that, because there are, as you well know, a lot of economics underneath the big business of sports, the NBA and beyond, and you have seen those issues collide in a really big way. Yeah, and if we go back to the outbreak, we forget that the NBA, the Utah Jazz being infected with the virus, that was a critical tipping point in sentiment. Mm-hmm. And I look to what's happened this week in much the same way, that suddenly this feels very real to people, this collective sense of inequity. Yeah, March 11th. I mean, that will be it's interesting you say that, because March 11th was the day that the NBA shut down, also the day that we learned that Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson had the coronavirus. It all happened on the same day, I believe. I'm pretty sure I have that right. And that changed everything.
It was a game changer, right? It was a game changer.
But that speaks to this whole notion of confidence that you're talking about, and perception plays into that, Peter.
It's entirely perception-based, and it relates to our perceptions of certainty and control. And if you think about those that are on this leg of this K-shaped recovery, they feel as if they have neither. They are voiceless, powerless, and the future feels very unclear. And that's such a difference to those on the arm.
Hey, Peter, just have about 30 seconds. Do you have hope that we can change this, especially when a lot of these folks don't have a place at the table?
I do have hope. I think that there are ways for us to bring back a greater sense of equity. But it's going to require collective sacrifice. Yeah. But remember, many of these are essential workers. These are food providers, healthcare providers. They're critical to the system overall.
All right, we have to leave it there. And I've got to say, this is something where I read something that Joe Weisenthal wrote, then I went to Twitter, and I found Peter, and I'm so glad, and I hope he comes back.
I think we have a new member of our gang. I'm just going to say
it. I think we do. Peter Atwater, he's adjunct professor of economics at William & Mary, joining us on the phone from Pennsylvania. Check out his writings on a K-shaped recovery. It's really, really smart. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Well, coming up, we are going to get the chart of the day, a Thursday edition. The chart, the song, it's all happening.
It's all happening. Dave Wilson will be back with us in just a moment. In the meantime, let's get back to your top business stories. Get another check on that trading day. Doug Krisner is here with that. 29 minutes to go, Doug.
Yeah, and we're higher right now. The S&P extending yesterday's record by 0.5%, and the NASDAQ comp rising about 0.1% after that all-time high yesterday. So the day began with the speech from Fed Chair Jay Powell. He unveiled a new approach to setting U.S. monetary policy. The basis here is to let inflation and the labor market run hot, hotter than we have known in the past. And that is moving long-term interest rates higher with the 10-year Treasury now at 74 basis points. Then there's this idea of fiscal stimulus. Earlier today, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she would not budge from Democrats' demands for a new pandemic relief package. We are told the Speaker had a 20-minute call a short while ago with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and this conversation didn't appear to yield any near-term breakthroughs. By the way, the two sides have been at an impasse since talks broke off August 7th. Right now, the Dow is up 0.9%, and in terms of the dollar's behavior, Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index rising by about 0.2%. We know Oracle and Microsoft are each trying to get a hold of the U.S. operations of TikTok. Now the Microsoft bid includes a partnership with Walmart. Walmart said this is a way to reach customers and to grow the third-party marketplace and advertising business. Microsoft shares right now higher by 3%. Walmart up 4.5%. I'm Doug Krisner. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Doug, thanks so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Great Thursday song. And just great Thursday vibe.
Yeah.
I don't know the song, though.
It's okay. Do you know who the woman singer is?
Yeah.
Is it Janis Joplin?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I just don't know the song.
Well, this was when she was singing with Big Brother and the Holding Company out of San Francisco.
Okay.
And that song is called, wait for it, it's the headline of the chart, Combination of the Two.
Oh. Wow, you're going deep on this stuff.
Yeah, well, you know, occasionally you have to kind of stretch it a bit.
This was early on? Was this early on in her career?
Yeah, early on.
Because the sound just is a little
really
different.
Became a bigger star after she left Big Brother.
Right.
She started doing her own thing.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Very cool. Very, very cool, Dave. So let's get to the chart.
Let's talk about the combination of the two when it comes to the chart. What we're talking about are what you might call factors. I mean, there's this whole sort of strategic approach in the last few years that's come up. It's called factor investing. You know, ways to kind of beat the market by focusing on specific traits of stocks. Think about momentum, quality when it comes to companies, volatility or the lack thereof, really. Liquidity, you know, how easy it is to buy and sell. And then there are size and, large cap, mid cap, small cap, and so on. And then growth versus value. Which way do you go? The faster growing companies are the ones that are cheaper relative to earnings or sales or asset values. And so when you put the last two together, you are seeing a gap in performance that you have not seen since the 1990s when internet stocks were all the rage. And I looked at this because I was checking out the Capital Spectator blog yesterday. Jim Paserno, who's the editor over there, was looking at the performance of different factors this year. And what really jumped out was the gap between the larger growth companies in the S&P 500 and these smaller value stocks in the S&P Small Cap 600. So in essence, you're putting two factors together. Well, we know S&P 500 growth companies think, you know, big tech, the FANGs, call them what you will. And on the other hand, you know, you've got smaller companies, probably nobody's ever heard of them, and they're supposed to be relatively cheap. Well, if you look at the performance of indexes that track those two types of companies, so the S&P 500 Growth Index and the S&P Small Cap 600 Value Index, as of yesterday, the year-to-date difference in their performance, 44 percentage points.
It's a huge gap.
It is. You haven't seen a number that big on a full-year basis since 1998. And, the indexes weren't around much before then. So you're looking at the possibility that it may be the biggest gap ever by the time this year ends. Who knows? It's just really a way to see what people have been really talking about all year. It's been, the big mega cap growth companies leading the way, others kind of left behind. And, the smaller value stocks have really been left behind.
I say this with love, Dave Wilson, because we've been talking about this. But so what? Does it mean anything significantly? Because, even though those value guys are cheap, so what? If,
let's go back. You can see it in the chart, actually. 1998 was the last time you had a bigger move for a full year. 1999, smaller gain. And then for 7 years in a row, the larger growth companies in the S&P 500 trailed the smaller value companies in the small cap 600. So these things do have a way of changing over time. And at least it's something to be mindful of. And if you want to know more, folks, send me an email. I get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
But do you feel like the growth names this time around are different from the growth names back in 99 leading up to 2000?
Well, you can argue that they're different because, you're talking about companies with a whole lot more revenue, with a whole lot more earnings than what we saw back then in a lot of cases. Nonetheless, the pendulum does have a way of swinging over time. And at the very least, it's something that you can use to put what we're seeing this year into perspective. You had to pick the right factors, and if you picked the wrong ones, you really got left far behind.
Yeah,
Factor
interesting.
investing.
All right, well, we started with a little Janice, and appreciate that, Dave Wilson. We'll talk to you just after the close of trading for your stock of the day.
Big
Carol.
Brother and the holding company.
Big Brother and the holding
Very
company.
Cool. That's really cool. Very
You know, speaking of San Francisco, you
What?
would appreciate this, Carol Masser.
What's
A
that?
movie I started watching the other night. I mentioned it in passing yesterday when you were mooning about Harrison Ford. The Conversation.
Oh, tell me about that with Harrison Ford, right?
Well, Harrison Ford plays a very small role, starring Gene Hackman, Francis Ford Coppola. It's one of his earliest movies. It is fantastic.
1974.
Set in San Francisco. That's what made me think of it. And I believe, and I'm going to check this in the break, it was nominated for Best Picture. It came out the same year, or at least the same Oscar year, that The Godfather did.
Jeez, don't you what's the deal with that?
But it's terrific, and it's set in San Francisco. That's what made me think of it. But
I will definitely check
a very
it out.
young Gene Hackman, who, and I can get with this.
Terry Garr,
already
Robert
pretty
Duvall?
bald. Terry Garr, yeah, it's an unbelievable cast. Anyway,
Okay.
Let's get down to Washington now. Nancy Lyons is there with World National Headlines. Hey, Nancy.
It is a great movie and a great movie for radio folks. President Trump says he plans to visit storm-damaged parts of the Gulf Coast.
We'll probably be going on Saturday or Sunday, and we'll be heading to Texas and Louisiana, and maybe an additional stop.
Trump spoke while visiting the Federal Emergency Management Agency to monitor the storm's assault. Well, President Trump says people are tired of the NBA, and he's calling it a political organization after the players sat out playoff games in protest over police shootings and racial inequality. Dr. Harry Edwards is a civil rights activist and UC Berkeley professor emeritus. He spoke with Bloomberg's Balance of Power.
Their next step has to be, how do we get the owners, the league, the teams, all of the players on the same page in terms of what our next steps are going to be as far as leveraging this power and influence that we have in this moment.
The NBA says it is hopeful the league will resume games either tomorrow or Saturday. Kamala Harris is speaking out against the Kenosha police shooting of Jacob Blake. The vice presidential candidate is pledging action to the parents of victims of police brutality.
Here's my promise to those mothers and fathers and all who stand with them. In a Biden-Harris administration, you will have a seat at the table.
Harris, a former prosecutor, says it is time now for police reforms. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows had a 20-minute phone conversation today about stimulus aid. A person familiar with the discussion says there were no signs of any near-term breakthroughs. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Carol Masser. Interesting story here. Josh Idelson, we love his stuff. We just caught up with him about issues related to labor. This is one that has to do with, I think, a lot of folks that listen to this show. And it's about COVID gag rules. Fascinating.
Yeah, totally. And Josh, kicks off the story talking about a worker at a cheesecake factory. And she talks about doing her shift, and then in between, while working, her boss told her that several of her colleagues told her that one coworker, had COVID-19. And so she then shared that with some of her colleagues. And then at the end of her shift, she went back to kind of counter cash, counter tips probably. And her boss and another supervisor were waiting, and they told her she wasn't allowed to mention the coronavirus case to anyone, including fellow staff.
Yeah.
Company was informing only the people who'd worked during the sick employee's last shift. And it was just kind of interesting. I've been hearing this from people about the information flow, what they get told, what they don't get told, and it's making some really unsettled, and I understand why.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you go through this story, there's some back and forth between her and Cheesecake Factory. And Cheesecake Factory, to give their side of it, said in a statement that it was, quote, balancing its obligation to protect private and confidential health information, end quote, while allowing discussion of COVID issues. A Cheesecake lawyer asked Ruck, who you mentioned, to withdraw her National Labor Relations Board complaint in exchange for the company posting a notice at her restaurant affirming that employees have the right to discuss health and safety issues. She said, this is complicated. It really is.
And it's happening
Where do you draw the line?
Right, and it's happening across a lot of industries, and there's been some retaliation against workers for maybe telling, that there are others who've got the virus. So listen, this is something we have to figure our way through. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Long-term interest rates are higher today on the notion that there is a risk of accelerating inflation longer term. Today, Fed Chair Jay Powell unveiled a new approach to setting U.S. monetary policy. The essence is that the Fed will let inflation and the labor market run a little hot. 10-year Treasury right now adding more than 5 basis points in yield. We're at 74 basis points. And in turn, we have the S&P Financials Index showing a gain right now of something around 1.9%. The Dow is up 0.8%. S&P 500 extending yesterday's record with a gain of about 0.4%, although the NASDAQ composite is down from an all-time high by about 0.1%. We're seeing Abbott Laboratory shares move higher. The company has received clearance for a 15-minute COVID test. Also seeing strength today in shares of Beyond Meat. The company is going to sell its plant-based burgers and sausage directly to consumers through a new e-commerce platform. Looks like there's some dollar strength right now with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index rising 0.1%. We do have a weaker yen where the greenback is concerned at 106.56 and a weaker euro at $1.1825. I'm Doug Krisner. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
And it is time for the drive to the close. And we talked about our gang earlier. Love the fact that this guy is part of our gang. Part of the reason, he's a super nice guy. The other part, he's really good at his job.
Totally.
I have to say, one of the top performing fund managers in his category. Talking about Eric Clark, portfolio manager for Rational Dynamic Brands Fund, joining us on the phone from San Diego. Eric, how are you? It's been a minute, as the kids say. And I wonder how you're doing there in Southern California. It's been wild.
Jason, I'm doing great. It has been wild. Thankfully, the fires aren't where they are up in LA, but we're doing okay. I can tell you that if you asked me March 1st, if we would have been sitting here with this kind of market, with these kinds of returns, I would have said that's absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I feel like this speaks to, we had a conversation with Peter Atwater at William & Mary, this K-shaped recovery, and this whole idea that there are some that are doing fine in this pandemic and this shutdown, others who are not. Just like there are big companies who've been able to access the capital markets and have enough money to shore up their businesses. Small businesses, it's a tougher story. We know that. So when you look at brands, Eric, are you starting to look at it through kind of the post-pandemic lens, or those that have actually done well here in terms of your portfolio?
Well, we're certainly clustered in the things that have what I call a lot of business model flexibility, which is what helped them, kind of recover and even thrive in some cases better than others. I will tell you that I'm certainly looking for ideas in the recovery basket. I'm frankly just a little bit cautious about the recovery and its sustainability. I'm not so sure we're not going to see another spike in the virus maybe in the fall when the flu season starts. And then we have the volatility around elections. So I just feel like the market has gone straight up since March 23rd, and now we just need to chop around a little bit and work off some of this overbought in the sentiment. But I still like the models that are very flexible, that, if you want to buy something and you're in an important category and you're the relevant brand,
right,
you can do it whether it's in the store or online.
Well, and that notion of flexibility and adaptability, I think, is really important. And I think about a conversation that's actually featured in the magazine this week that Carol and I had with the CEO of Blue Apron, Linda Kozlowski. And, she was talking about how they are working under this assumption that even when we get to whatever the next normal is going to be, behavior will be changed, and those companies that were able to adapt during this period may continue to see some strength, and maybe that strength accelerates. And as I look at some of the names you like, whether it's Lululemon, which I always ask you about and am fascinated by, as you know, NVIDIA, Baba, Twitter, Netflix, I mean, they all seem to have those characteristics of they've been able to figure this out and also have positioned themselves to do well with whatever comes next.
Yeah, I mean, consumers are fickle, but now, when they become loyal to you for whatever reason, you really have to mess up on a regular basis to push them away. And so I think for the e-commerce users will just continue to do what they were doing. The people who weren't big e-commerce users are probably going to do more of that now that they've seen how easy it is. And the spending that we've been doing has been in much more narrow cases with home improvements, or we're stuck in our homes, so we want to upgrade our homes and home furnishings, and we want to order things online, and we're exercising more because we have more time, and so we like the Lululemon. And I love the Lulu buying the mirror. We bought a mirror. I don't know if you guys have one. There is enormous potential for that mirror in the Lulu stores.
Really? Tell me about the mirror. I don't have one. Carol and I both have Pelotons, but I know a lot about it. But tell me how it is as a user.
It's amazing. So it's a stand-up mirror, so you get a chance to kind of see what you're doing with the exercises. You have this hologram of your instructor, and they have like 70 different classes. I mean, they're building new classes every day. Different, one could be stretch, one could be yoga, one could be boxing. So you essentially can get all of the things that you need from an exercise perspective right there with your own personal coach, when you want it, how you want it. And it's intuitive. It learns. I filled out a profile, and in the middle of my exercises, it actually gave me an alternative exercise because I told it I had bad knees. I mean,
that is so cool.
This thing is going to learn over time with your habits, and so it's intriguing as a new business model for Lulu, even when the current business model is just crushing it right now.
We need to have them on, Jason, because we really need to talk about it. Hey, Eric, I have to ask you, Abbott Labs is in your portfolio. You must feel pretty good today.
Well, I would love to say that I did. I actually sold it like a dum-dum because the stock broke down a little bit, and we looked, and we're pretty active, so I didn't give it enough time, and so I'm happy for Abbott shareholders. I am a little skeptical of how this whole thing's going to work. I mean, I'm going to have to get a test every day now just to feel comfortable. But, baby steps, right? I think this is super helpful and probably why a lot of the recovery stocks are doing well today.
Oh, my apologies. I think it was then maybe the end of the most recent quarter or something that it had listed as a holding. Well, sorry for you.
Yeah, we recently sold it.
Sorry about that.
Before we let you go, Eric, talk a little bit about Netflix, because I feel like people are fascinated by that, especially as some of the other streamers, especially from the more traditional media world like Disney, have come on. You still like Netflix here?
I still love Netflix. I think it's one of those things, and maybe this is just my family, but when we turn on the television, we got rid of cable long ago. When we turn on television, we see our Roku interface, and then we look and decide which streamer we want to go to. And 9 out of 10 times, the first place we go is Netflix. That's the first place we search for content. And so Netflix has become the cable. That's where we start. And if we can't find anything in Netflix, then maybe we move on to Amazon Prime, or maybe there's the show Billions on Showtime, or whatever the case is. So I just feel like, yes, the U.S. is very penetrated. The non-U.S. is still very underpenetrated. I do believe they have pricing power because it's still cheap. Churn is going to stay low. So I love the name, even though it's pretty expensive. So it's not a huge position.
All right, let's not make it so long before we catch up with you again. Really good to hear your voice. Eric Clark, Portfolio Manager, Rational and Dynamic Brands Fund, getting in shape in San Diego with his mirror. Cool. He already was, but interesting to hear that endorsement. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And that is the closing bell for this Thursday, August 27th. A mixed picture for equities. We do have the S&P 500 reaching an all-time high for a fifth straight session. The gain here is about 0.2%. We're going to need a few moments, though, to get accurate settlement on these numbers. We heard from Fed Chair Jay Powell today. He unveiled a new approach to setting U.S. monetary policy. The inclination is essentially to allow inflation and the labor market to run hot. That idea sent long-term interest rates higher today, with the 10-year Treasury rising by more than 5 basis points and yield to 74 basis points. And that, in turn, ignited a bit of a rally in the financials today. The S&P Financials Index rising nearly 1.8%. For the Dow Industrial Average, a gain of 0.6%, although the NASDAQ Composite today was down from a record high by nearly 0.4%. At the margins today, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying she's not going to budge from Democrats' demands on a new pandemic relief package. The Speaker had a 20-minute call with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and that did not appear to yield any near-term breakthroughs. U.S. weekly jobless claims remaining above 1 million. On the other hand, pending home sales reached the highest level in 15 years in the month of July. Oracle and Microsoft, we know, have each submitted bids to buy the U.S. operations of TikTok. Now it seems as though Microsoft, that bid includes partnership with Walmart. Walmart today saying it's a way to reach consumers and grow its third-party marketplace and advertising business. Today, Walmart shares up 4.5%, Microsoft better by about 2.5%, Oracle shares weaker by 0.6%. Abbott Laboratories rallying 8%. That's after winning clearance for a 15-minute COVID test. And Beyond Meat gaining more than 5%. The company is going to sell its products directly to consumers through a new e-commerce platform. Dollar strength today with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index rising 0.2%. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Doug, thank you so much. Well, we do want to get the latest on Hurricane Laura. It is one of the most powerful storms ever to hit Louisiana. Steve Merleman, Bloomberg News editor, joining us on the phone in New Jersey. Steve, what is the latest?
The latest is that the storm is headed northeast and it's lost its hurricane status. It's a near tropical storm and it should tittle out over the next 24 or 48 hours or so. But in its wake, it's left a lot of damage. It killed 4 people in Louisiana, all of them when trees fell onto their homes. And it did a fair amount of property damage. It broke loose a casino boat in Lake Charles that's been lodged under a bridge on I-10. And the bridge was already one of the most deteriorated in America before the boat hit it. And probably most importantly, the storm set off a fairly impressive fire at a chemical plant near Lake Charles that makes pool chemicals, and it's been spewing chlorine across the landscape for several hours now.
And Steve, what do we know about the effect on the oil and gas industry? Because that obviously industry was essentially holding its breath while this storm raged in the Gulf and then came ashore. What do we know about the effect?
Well, I think they came off better than expected. Everyone keeps using the cliche, dodged a bullet. It was when the storm came ashore, it was fairly fast. It didn't hover for too long. There are outages in, I believe, liquefied natural gas terminals and refineries, but they're expected to be measured in days rather than weeks.
All right. Steve Merleman, we're going to check in with you next hour. We really appreciate that update. Hurricane Laura, as he said, moving into the interior of the country, losing its hurricane status, now a tropical storm, but certainly some damage and a human toll in its wake. Carol.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get to the markets a little bit because we did have the closing bell on Wall Street. Doug, of course, giving you those final numbers here. And we did bounce around a little bit, up, down, if you will. As for the S&P 500, we had 319 names in the index actually posting gains today, 184 lower, 2 unchanged. And if I look at the major industry groups, I teased it a little bit just before the close. Financials were up almost 2%. Real estate was up about 1.5%. Healthcare a gain of about 0.9%. I'm sure Abbott was a lot of the reason why we saw that gain. Bottom of the pack, though, communication services down about 1.25%. I think those are perhaps some of the tech names that have had a bit of a run up, but that's kind of your bigger picture here, Jason.
Yeah, so the smaller picture, some individual names. Your worst performer, Cody, as Dave Wilson said. We love talking about that name. They are in the midst of trying to get a turnaround going. They've got a new CEO, as you probably remember, starting, I believe, the first of the coming month. Sue Nabi taking over for Peter Harf, the chairman of JAB, the biggest shareholder. This is a company that sort of needs to figure out how to move forward. It's been an incredibly volatile stock this year, but those numbers pretty bleak today, driving the shares down 8%.
Let's talk about Beyond Meat because it got a kick up.
Love
I
it.
mean, at its highs, it was up more than 10%, finishing the day with still a gain, but just up about 5.3%. So definitely a bullish day. Launching a direct-to-consumer site. I think this is huge.
Totally. Yeah, it's
for
big.
them, right? You don't have to go to stores. You can just go to them and just buy what you want.
Yeah, click it buy. I'll totally do that. I got some Beyond Meat, Beyond Burgers in my refrigerator. I'll probably grill them up this weekend.
Do you think you'll buy more, though, on a direct-to-consumer site, or do you think more in stores and things?
You know, I actually think I'll buy it more in stores.
Yeah.
You know, it's more likely to go on sale. You're shopping. You're doing all those things. Like, I'm not sure. But, you know, I am, like you, fortunate to live in a place where I have easy access to stores. So maybe I'd feel differently if I didn't have that. Want to mention quickly a couple names that are your leaders. They're related. Abbott, we talked about that earlier. Womp womp for our buddy Eric Clark, who sold that, unfortunately. A big gain for them, almost 8%. Given that they've got a rapid test that's been approved by the FDA. And Live Nation, that's your biggest gainer, and gaining in part by all estimates or by all accounts on the fact that maybe rapid testing means we could see some concerts and live events again.
It's like you came alive again. You were like, what?
So excited.
Right, Live Nation up almost 9% in today's session. But if you think about it, I mean,
makes sense.
I feel like this rapid testing is a game changer. And I do wonder, I think it's a game changer. Because I just think one of the questions I have if I'm meeting with people or something, they're all like, okay, so what's been your situation? Have you been tested recently?
Yep, totally.
That's what it comes down to.
It does. All right, let's take a quick look at volatility. The VIX, it is up on the day, about 4.7%, closing at 24.36. It's Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, where are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for a price on Wilson.
Open up the door, it's Dave. Who? Dave.
Hey, Mr. Wilson, let's get to your stock of the day. Ticker is TITN. What do you got for us, Dave?
That's right, Carol. Titan Machinery. It's a farm and construction equipment dealer. The company sells new and used machines, offers rentals, and provides parts and service. Titan Machinery was founded in 1980 and went public in 2007. Now, those shares with the ticker TITN set a record in 2012 and have fluctuated since then. This year, they fell as much as 53% through mid-March. Titan Machinery's recouped most of the loss, and fiscal second quarter results that were released today helped spur the recovery. The company reported a profit of 29 cents a share, and not the loss that analysts expected on average in a Bloomberg survey. Revenue also beat projections. Titan Machinery's U.S. agricultural earnings and sales rose in the quarter, while U.S. construction and international business declined. The company said in a statement that the farm equipment gains reflected greater demand for parts and service. The results sent Titan Machinery's shares to their highest price since January, and they closed with a gain of 10.7%.
Nice. Nice for them.
Yeah. Good for them. All right, Dave Wilson, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Dave Wilson, our stocks editor, he'll be back with us tomorrow for his market insights, his chart, and stock of the day. Carol, coming up, the RNC, night 4.
Wrapping it up.
Zano's going to be back. Class in session. We're going to be front row, waving our hands. Ooh, 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 calling me.
Oh, I can totally see. That's how you were. That's how you are. That's
Real,
how I am.
and you were just like in the back shooting spitballs. Give me a break. All right.
No, I was not. Let's get back to world and national news headlines. Over to Ed Baxter-Rico in San Francisco. Hey, Ed.
Yeah, the second option sounds like a whole hell of a lot more fun. For sure. Okay, Hurricane Laura weakening to a tropical storm Laura, but in its wake in Louisiana, chemical fires wrecked buildings and flooded roads.
There's about 500,000 people without power. That number most likely will go up. A lot of trees across the region where this storm is headed in North Louisiana into Arkansas. So we are going to see quite a few power outages because of those wind gusts are staying so high.
Meteorologist Jennifer Gray says the danger has not passed, echoed by Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards.
Right now we have search and rescue teams that are already going throughout the entire area to see if there is anybody who does need some type of assistance with the level of water that you're talking about, especially in the Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Orange areas.
Now sustained winds 150 miles per hour were clocked with a large storm surge. Now the better news here is, if there is such a thing as better news, that the oil producers and refiners, although still doing inventory, seem to avoid the very worst. It is Trump acceptance speech night at the RNC, but he is already out today talking about violence and answering questions about the NBA's one-day stoppage.
I don't know much about the NBA protest. I know their ratings have been very bad because I think people are a little tired of the NBA.
And the one constant theme has been safety at the convention, and Joe Biden is listening to all of it, and he has responded as well today.
He continues to root for violence. It's the country will be substantially safer when he is no longer in office.
Special coverage tonight, 9 o'clock Wall Street time in San Francisco. I'm Ed Baxter.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Carol Master. We're going to talk about this a little bit later on in the show. But the NBA, as we just heard the president talk a little bit about, they have agreed to restart the playoffs, Carol, after not playing last night, not playing tonight. Interestingly, one of the things that has come across the tape over the last couple hours is the NHL, which had gone ahead last night with its games, in contrast to the NBA, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, the WNBA. The NHL had played. They are not playing tonight. So some consistency now across the major leagues, but we do expect that we will see sports resume this weekend. That's the best we know at this moment, with the NBA leading the way.
Well, and it's interesting because, if you look at the NBA, they have successfully been in this bubble down there in Florida, right, at Disney World. And, I think what we're hearing is that many of them have kind of given up a lot. They've given up being with their families to do this. And the longer this goes on, of living in this bubble, the longer they are away from that. So I think some of that's at play too.
Yeah,
from what I've read.
The other thing that is very much at play, and I was listening and talking to a lot of people today about this, is this notion of where can they make the most impact? And there is some strength in the platform that they have there. To your point, in the bubble, they've given up a lot to be there, but what would they do if they went home? What can they do as a collective effort? Are there things that they can continue to point out? Can they amplify efforts like More Than a Vote, which LeBron James is a headliner for?
You and I talked about this in our chat last night. Like, I do wonder, if you go away, you lose that platform. Whereas you're out there at the games, you still have a significant presence. And I think that is not something that you can walk away from so quickly.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Mixed day for the equity market today. On one hand, we had the Dow higher and the S&P 500 reaching an all-time high for a fifth session. But the NASDAQ composite was off from an all-time high by about 0.3%. Today, Fed Chair Jay Powell unveiled a new approach to setting monetary policy, so we now know that inflation and the labor market will be allowed to run a little hot. That moved rates higher and lifted financial shares. The S&P Financials Index today was up about 1.7%. Many of the diagnostic companies were weak today. That was after Abbott Laboratories was given approval for a 15-minute COVID test. Abbott shares today were up by more than 6%. You know, we know Walmart is now in potential partnership with Microsoft on a bid for U.S. assets of TikTok. Today, Walmart saying it could give the company a way to reach consumers and grow its third-party marketplace and advertising business. Today, Walmart shares were up 4.5%. Microsoft today rising about 2.5%. Beyond Meat picking up 5% today. The company's going to sell those plant-based burgers and sausages directly to consumers through its new e-commerce platform. I'm Doug Krisner. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Aren't we glad it's almost Friday, Doug?
Oh,
I'm just
my
gonna.
God.
I know you've been like carrying the network for us
You've
this
been all
week.
men to all people.
You really have. I love Doug Krisner. All right. I also love our next guest, and let's get right to it because we get ready for the fourth and final night of the Republican National Convention. I watched some last night. Back with us, Bloomberg News political contributor and Iona College professor of political science, Jeannie Zaino. She's our favorite professor. We're just going to put it out there. She's back with us from Westchester.
Ooh, don't tell Peter Atwater.
Well, okay. Those are my two favorites.
Favorite political professor.
Yes.
There we go.
And that's my favorite eco. But don't tell Danny Blanchflower either. Okay, we're getting in trouble. You're all amazing. Jeannie, good to have you back with us. I have to say, watching last night, big emphasis on women. And I know it was the 100th anniversary of white women being given the right to vote. But just take us back there. What stood out for you last night?
So good to talk to you, and I'm so glad I'm your favorite professor ever, bar none. No, I'm just kidding. Terrible to say. No, it was a really, really fascinating because, of course, while the convention is going on, we've got this hurricane hitting, we've got all the unrest, we've got the NBA, WNBA boycotts, and then, of course, you've got the economic unemployment issues, the crisis there, and the pandemic. So there was certainly so much breaking news and so much going on, and, of course, as you mentioned, some of those statements and those speeches were pre-taped, so they didn't even have the opportunity to address them. But there were an awful lot of women. They focused on, in particular, working women.
Wait a minute. Can I ask you? So were they tone? Listen, you can always do. Listen, we know broadcast. You can always do things live, right? You can always do a redo. Were they tone deaf in not addressing more of what was going on in the real world?
I think so, and I agree with you. They, you know, it's really, and this I think is going to be a challenge for the president tonight, by the way, is you do appear tone deaf if there is a major crisis occurring in the country, and you simply sort of pretend it's not happening. Now, I will give Mike Pence credit. He did not directly address some of it, but he did address the hurricane, did address the social unrest, and you may not like the way he addressed it, but he did. But to your point, some of these speakers didn't, and obviously if you're pre-taped, you can't, but of course the party could have decided a different way to do it. So I do think they sort of missed a moment, if you will, there in some of that. And, you know, a lot of the women that you were mentioning who spoke, you know, Laura Trump, the White House press secretary who we know so well, Kellyanne Conway, Joni Ernst, a lot of these people, they were there to soften up President Trump and to not soften him up, but soften up our impression of him and make him seem more empathetic. And, you know, they did their job in doing that. But, of course, again, while all this stuff is going on, it does appear tone deaf.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because there is a certain tone to this week, Jeannie, and I go back to something that we heard from Larry Kudlow, who obviously is a very familiar voice to our audience as the chief economic advisor to the president, speaking about the pandemic and everything that's going on with the virus in the past tense. I mean, there is a certain willing of a different reality, it feels like, that is on the table and being produced just about every day.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in a way, I mean, whether you're talking, you mentioned the Kudlow address, I think it was the other night, which got a lot of discussion because, of course, he did talk about the pandemic as if it was over. Yeah. And, of course, we've got almost 180,000 people dying daily, unfortunately, of this, people getting ill, and almost 180,000 people have perished already, and he was talking about it in the past tense. And similarly, with this attempt to sort of, you know, make President Trump a more empathetic character, they're almost trying to tell you, you know, don't believe what you see, don't believe what you hear, but we're going to give you sort of a different view of it. And you sort of get whiplash wondering, you know, it's like you wake up in a different world. So the pictures that you're seeing coming out of there don't really necessarily square with what we know as reality. And it is a bit frustrating when you're trying to watch and cover it.
So when you think about what we expect to hear, and as you talk to folks around this, what do we expect to hear, and maybe what do we need to hear from the president when he gives this acceptance speech? Because tonally, you never quite know where he's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's always expect the unexpected with President Trump. So I am, you know, most curious to see if we get any surprises tonight. We were talking, you know, behind the scenes last night. I keep thinking somebody said maybe Kanye West will come out and do a Taylor Swift on him. I don't know, something like that. But, you know, who knows? But so, you know, he always has surprises. So there may be something along those lines. What we're hearing he is going to do is he is going to continue this line of attack against Joe Biden to paint him as extreme. You know, we keep hearing about Joe Biden as a socialist. You know, if you didn't know Joe Biden's record better, you would think he was a communist socialist. It's certainly not the record we know of Joe Biden, but they're going to be painting him as an extremist economically, but also in terms of the social unrest and the law and order issue. They want to keep making the case that he favors he has this sort of dystopian vision.
All right,
that certainly seems like something we're going to hear more and more about, especially as it ramps up.
All right, we're going to come back with Bloomberg News political contributor and Iona College professor of political science, Jeannie Zaino. We'll continue this discussion. In the meantime, for those of you listening in New York and San Francisco and watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week continues. If you're listening on Bloomberg 99.1 in D.C., Sound On with Kevin Cirilli is coming up next.
All right. I can fully guarantee you that if you and I were in class with Professor Zaino, you and I would have just walked out, although she's coming back, but we would walk out of class and be like, can you believe that Professor Zaino made that reference to Kanye West and Taylor Swift? She's so cool. She really knows what's going on. I love it.
Oh, my God. I love when you do that voice.
I know.
I'm sorry. It's funny. We're going to come back with Jeannie in just a moment.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, coming up, class is back. Everybody put down their Cokes and put your snacks away because we got to get back to business with Jeannie Zaino. She's going to, maybe give us a sense of what we've learned over the past couple weeks, and maybe more importantly, what happens next, because it's a quick ride to November 3rd, Carol.
And if she mentions Kanye West again, we're just going to fall off our chairs. I'm just going to say.
She's the best.
All right, let's get back to your top business stories. Once again, here is Doug Krisner. Hey, Doug.
So if class is back, can you accept a virtual classroom? I mean, it may have been one of the drivers for Dell Technologies. I mean, the PC sales got a boost probably from virtual learning. And right now, if you look at the stock in late trading, pushing up by 4.8% today. We did have the S&P 500 reaching an all-time high for a fifth straight session. You go back to the low in March, the benchmark is up more than 55%. The Dow was higher today by 0.6%. A lot of the financials rallied after long-term interest rates moved higher. 10-year Treasury last quoted in New York at 74 basis points. So we picked up about 6 basis points on the day, and that came after Fed Chair Jay Powell unveiled a new approach to setting U.S. monetary policy. The inclination here is to allow inflation and the labor market to run hot. Weekly jobless claims above 1 million again. Although, if you look at pending home sales, we reached the highest level in July that we've seen in about 15 years. NASDAQ Composite today down from an all-time high. We were weaker by about a little more than 0.3%. Microsoft, we know, is in the race for the U.S. assets of TikTok, the U.S. operations. This bid includes a partnership with Walmart, and Walmart saying it's going to be a way for it, should this be successful, to reach customers and grow its third-party marketplace and advertising business. Walmart today up 4.5%, Microsoft up more than 2.5%, and Abbott Laboratories rallying after the company won clearance for that 15-minute COVID test. I'm Doug Krisner, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Doug, thank you so much. Let's get back to class. Jeannie Zaino, political contributor for Bloomberg, professor of political science at Iona College. All right, Jeannie, so we're going to hear from President Trump tonight. Let's look ahead just for a few minutes if we can, because we'll be out of the conventions, and it's a dead sprint to November 3rd. What happens next, knowing that we can never really predict what happens next in the world we're living in? What do you expect over the next few weeks?
Well, after I put on a loop that you guys actually called me cool on the air, and I play it over and over again.
Tell your kids. Tell your kids.
Yeah, for my kids, I'm working on it now. I think the next sort of big marker is going to be these debates, and already there's controversy about these debates. We have Nancy Pelosi out saying she doesn't think that Joe Biden should even give Donald Trump the courtesy of a debate. He doesn't deserve it. Biden apparently says no, he's fine to go forward with those. So, there was always a question about whether, in fact, not Joe Biden, but Donald Trump would consent to a debate, and that's been sort of an iffy proposition. And now you have Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, suggesting that maybe those shouldn't go forward. So that is going to be the big marker. Of course, also Mike Pence and Kamala Harris is going to be a fascinating debate. And then, sort of just this influx of advertising. The Democrats have been advertising a lot on television, the Republicans on digital. The Trump campaign bought 96 hours of the YouTube banner for over convention week. It's an astounding amount of money. So that all is going to be inundating particularly the battleground states as they sort of race, as you mentioned, very, very quickly towards November. And we can't forget the battle, the down ballot races. The Senate is increasingly up for grabs. Democrats want to retain the House and pick up numbers. So there's a lot to watch as we go forward.
Well, how do you see the debates playing out? Let's think about, a Biden-Trump debate. Who's got the most at stake there in a debate?
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating because, of course, Donald Trump didn't do particularly well in the debates against Hillary Clinton. You know, people said if you sort of closed your eyes and just listened to the substance, she won. But, of course, that was not the outcome. And, you know, similarly to the conventions in 2016, it almost didn't matter if you had the best convention or the best debate or raised the most money in terms of winning, as Donald Trump proved over and over again. This year, of course, he's in a very different position as the incumbent, but down, at least right now, in the polls. You know, as these battleground state polls continue to sort of close in, and I think they're going to be very, very tight, I do think that debates are going to be critical on both sides. You know, and whoever, so, you know, the idea with debates is, you know, don't make any errors if you're ahead. So technically right now that would be Joe Biden. But again, he's not the incumbent. That's Donald Trump. So I think they both have an awful lot to lose here.
Jeannie, one thing I wanted to make sure I asked you about was the whole notion of early voting and all the efforts that are underway underneath and as a part of all of this social unrest, that there does seem to be a zeroing in on the issue of get out and vote in a way that I don't remember in my lifetime ever seeing. And I wonder, as you think about this from a political science perspective, what are the chances that early voting, mail-in voting, and just all of these efforts underway do give this a different tone and tenor and potentially change the result?
I think there's absolutely, you know, first of all, obviously with COVID, we are in an unprecedented time regarding voting itself. You know, how many poll workers, you know, many over the age of 60 will continue to feel safe working there? How many voters will want to go to the polls or be able to versus people trying to vote online or not online, you know, by mail? So that's going to change, you know, drastically compared to what we're used to in many states. And you couple that with the questions about voting security and voting irregularities that have been raised so far. You know, the first day of the convention, you had the president out there talking about vote harvesting, telling Republicans in many states that Democrats are trying to steal your votes. They're going to send ballots only to Democratic areas. You know, these unfounded allegations, but they continue to be out there. And people do feel that there is a voting crisis in this country, that their votes are not secure. Even in, you know, the best of times, you've got people who say that they go and they wait in these long lines for the opportunity to vote in person. And, of course, that's pre-COVID. So I think a lot changes. And then, of course, early voting just adds to that. The president, in terms of their spending, digital and television, they're saying they're targeting a lot of that to early voting states at this point where people are making these decisions now.
Yeah, it's going to be really something to watch. All right, before you go, you have to promise us, Jeannie, I know the conventions are over as of tonight, but you have to come and hang out with us and keep us honest about this because it's going to be a crazy time. We need you.
Please have me back. I love talking to you guys. I only feel cool around you, too. So, you know, it's a very small group who thinks I'm cool.
Listen, we will tell your students, your kids, whoever it is, we will vouch for you anytime. You're the best. Jeannie Zaino, political contributor for Bloomberg, professor of political science at Iona College, joining us from Westchester, New York. Carol?
Yeah, just a great conversation. And I have to say, you know, we even talk at home about, you know, doing mail-in votes, but we're like, you know what, I think I kind of want to go and pull the lever just to make sure that that vote gets counted. So we are talking about this big time at home. Isn't that weird? Just because of these things that are being discussed about and concerns about.
Yeah,
how
I voted by mail for the primary.
You
Felt good about it.
Yeah. All right.
All right, let's get to Ed Baxter out in San Francisco. He's got world and national headlines. Hey, Ed.
All right. Thank you, Jason. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy is considering raising the state's gasoline tax by 5 to 10 cents a gallon to spend on infrastructure. He says revenues are way down as people work at home and don't commute as much. While now Tropical Storm Laura continues to blow through the Gulf Coast states, some very important work begins in Texas. Governor Greg Abbott.
Right now, we have search and rescue teams that are already going throughout the entire area to see if there is anybody who does need some type of assistance with the level of water that you're talking about, especially in the Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Orange areas.
And there is now the threat of a different kind of weather.
The tornado threat is definitely there, and it'll continue to be that way throughout the day.
Meteorologist Jennifer Gray, the Gulf oil industry seems to escape the worst, although inventory remains. RNC tonight, Bloomberg political contributor, the cool Jeannie Zaino, here with Jason and Carol.
what we're hearing he is going to do is he is going to continue this line of attack against Joe Biden to paint him as extreme. You know, we keep hearing about Joe Biden as a socialist. You know, if you didn't know Joe Biden's record better, you would think he was a communist socialist. It's certainly not the record we know of Joe Biden.
Jeannie talking he as Donald Trump. This is his acceptance speech. And Joe Biden is fighting back against that line and safety in America today.
I made it clear from the beginning that there's no place for violence or looting or burning. And when I spoke with Jacob Blake's mother, Julia, you guys played her on the air. She's saying that's not who we are. That's not who our family is. That's not who Jacob is. Don't do it.
Convention coverage, 9 Wall Street time. I'm Ed Baxter.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. You were listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, amid all of this, I want to go back to a story we've been talking a lot about, Carol. We talk about it most days, but I feel like today, just given everything that's going on in the world, we've talked a little bit less about it. Back to the office.
Yes.
New York City specifically, one of the most vocal folks around all this, and it makes sense why he would be, is Jeff Blau. He's the CEO of Related Companies, developer behind Hudson Yards, the Time Warner Center, and many more. That's just in New York City. When you think about nationally and internationally, it's a massive player. He's been picking up the phone, talking especially to the chiefs of finance companies and basically saying, hey, let's get people back to the office, back to the city. We need it.
Yeah, listen, this was an interesting interview. I heard some of it. David Weston caught up with him on Bloomberg TV and played some also on Bloomberg Radio on his broadcast. But you're right. He says, here's a quote, if employers from Jeff Blau, CEO of Related, he says, if employers tell their employees that they don't need to come back, they're going to decide to hang out at their parents or in their Hamptons and phone it in. Ultimately, businesses are not going to be able to survive that. And listen, he's not wrong to some extent. There's a whole ecosystem of businesses that are impacted by folks who work in major cities.
Right.
We know it. We do it. You know, we support a lot of small businesses and large businesses, to be quite honest. And so it's interesting, though, to see how aggressive they are in kind of calling up folks and saying, get your workers back to work.
Right. And Jeff Blau is saying in response to J.P. Morgan calling some of its recruits back to London and New York to report to the offices, he called it, quote, a very important statement, and it also reinforces that you can't run business on Zoom. You can't bring new people into culture and training online. And I think that element, the younger employees, you do miss something when you are not in the midst of it. You and I are seasoned pros. You know, nothing can stop us. But, you know, remember when we were young whippersnappers just a couple of years ago?
Just a couple of years ago, right. I mean, you didn't
in Jeannie Zaino's class.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It was another record for the S&P today. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And some news after the bell. Two stories. One from Dell Technologies. The company reported revenue and profit above estimates. I guess it's a sign of strong demand for PCs given this work/learn from home world that we're in right now. Dell shares in late trading off their best levels, but nonetheless up about 1.6%. And Gap tempered the pace of its decline in revenue in the last quarter. The retailer beat sales estimates, and those shares higher by about 3.4% in late New York trade. So today began with this much anticipated speech from Fed Chair Jay Powell. He essentially unveiled a new approach to setting U.S. monetary policy, and it's going to allow for inflation and the labor market to both run hot. And that was one of the factors behind sending long-term interest rates higher today. 10-year Treasury last quoted in New York at around 74 basis points. Now, weekly jobless claims remain above 1 million, but look at the pending home sales data. In the month of July, sales at the highest level in 15 years. Now, as I alluded to earlier, the S&P was at an all-time high today for a fifth session. We're up 55% from the March low. NASDAQ comp, though, down from a record by a little more than 0.3%. The Dow, for its part, was up about 0.6%. Some dollar strength today. We've got yen weakness as we get set for Asian trading in a little while from now. I'm Doug Krisner. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Doug, thanks so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, earlier today, I and my colleagues on the Bloomberg Business of Sports podcast, we got a chance to catch up with Jason Wright. You may know the name. He is the newly minted, and by new, I mean he's 4 days into the job, the new president of the NFL's Washington football team. They, of course, changed their name under intense pressure from sponsors and others. Day 4 into the job, and he is dealing with even more things than he expected, Carol, given what's going on in the world of sports, and also, I think what is fair to say, an incredibly dysfunctional organization that he is now leading. Here's an excerpt from that conversation, and we were specifically talking about the NFL's efforts to have tough conversations about race. I did want to take you back to, in some ways, where we started in terms of what you're doing in the moment as it relates to players. And a lot of this comes down to, again, in the argot of business, sort of talent management in a lot of ways. As we look at what's going on with the NBA and even in Major League Baseball, which has evolved a little bit over this summer, the NFL has taken a lot of criticism over the past few years, all the way back, or sort of at its most heightened moment, with how it initially handled Colin Kaepernick and kneeling during the national anthem. As you take this job and as you look at this situation through the lens of a former player, as a business person, and now a president, is the NFL doing enough? Is the NFL different in terms of how it's approaching its players and candidly empowering them to say what they want to and need to say?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to say on day 4. However, I think the thing I would point to, beyond what I shared about Coach Rivera and how we're approaching it as a club, which I very much support, Commissioner Goodell's conversation that he had with Emmanuel Acho on uncomfortable conversations with a black man earlier this week. And people can feel whatever kind of way they want about how what was in that conversation, and I understand cynicism, although I don't think cynicism is. I'm a cynic myself, but I try to put it away when I'm focused on change, because I don't think cynicism helps to be a change maker. But there's good reasons for cynicism and all that stuff. Sure. What was remarkable to me about that conversation was an open view, a transparent lens into an individual evolution of views. I think this is something that, in general, on difficult to discuss topics, we don't often make space for in society. For people to learn, to change positions based on what they learn, and to have, added nuance and layers to how they think about things over time, because people grow in their understandings as they're exposed to other perspectives. I thought was great about that conversation was visibly and in a very clear way seeing that evolution of thinking in Commissioner Goodell. My thinking has evolved over time. Look, and I've been someone who's been engaged on topics of racial equity, especially around economic empowerment, for years. My thinking has evolved since, Kaepernick went from initially sitting and then on the advice of former military members taking a knee to be more respectful, and then the dialogue that has ensued since over years. My thinking has evolved since then on topics like this. And I think the fact that there was public space for that should be instructive to all of us. This isn't about, being, at least to me, at least within our organization, being above some bar of what you need to think, believe, etc., on the topic of racial justice or any topic. But it's about honest dialogue, expression of views, and evolution in a direction of something that creates positive change, where obviously change is needed. It's like it's sort of like I think it's a super overquoted, but Dr. King said the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. And I think it is not that the arc vision is what really strikes me. I look at it as a slow bend or a curvature that is gradual and represents a bit of that evolution of how we move towards these things. Do you need big disruption to catalyze it? Yes, often you do. But I think that's the best frame that I can put on how I've seen this dialogue evolve over time and where I see the NFL is at.
And that is a portion of the conversation that we had for our Bloomberg Business of Sports podcast with Jason Wright. He is the brand new president of NFL's Washington football team. It's a big job, Carol.
Yeah, and as he said, though, it's interesting to hear him talk, this idea of needing big disruptions, and I think that's exactly what you need, and, to maybe bring about and facilitate some changes, and hopefully take some moves to bring about things that create a lasting change, a significant change.
I also was struck, and listening back to that, I mean, obviously I was in the conversation, but, you sort of pick things up when you listen to it again, and this notion of your thinking evolving, I think, is a really important one, too. And I think too often we are quick to dismiss other people and essentially say, well, that person thinks this and I think that. We're changing human beings all the time. And to hear him say, clearly, Roger Goodell's thinking has changed. The NFL's thinking has changed. Roger Goodell of 3 years ago would never have sat down for that conversation with Emmanuel Acho. Never. He wouldn't have done it. That wasn't the position that he was in. His thinking has evolved. And to hear Jason Wright, a black president, the first black president of a team, say, my thinking has evolved, I think that's a really powerful statement in many ways and instructive for all of us, because we do have to be different, and we can be. That's what's important.
Our social media folks, earlier today I was reading in and, what was buzzing out in the social media world, and they said yesterday was 4 years to the day when Colin Kaepernick peacefully protested in a 49ers uniform sitting during the national anthem of a preseason game 4 years ago.
Yep.
Right? But to your point, that it's a different conversation. The thinking is changing. The conversation is changing. People who didn't budge before are budging now. That's significant to me.
It is significant. I mean, think about how long change happens slowly until it starts happening fast. And you have to think that is, if you have any optimism about this moment, that's what you have to believe in.